Welcome to the Revive Ministries Podcast. This month the theme is the silent pain. We're really recognizing the post-traumatic stress disorder awareness month. I just want to give a little context, especially those who are listening, those who may not know. PTSD really appeared in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders in the 1980s. However, it was usually coined in the very early times as soldier's heart, shell shock, war neurosis, those kinds of things. But as PTSD became more prevalent for the military community, it also created awareness. We started obviously see efforts of creating awareness. July 27th, 2010, PTSD Awareness Day was established due to the recognition of Staff Sergeant Joe Beal of a National Guard serviceman who experienced PTSD after 2 tours in Iraq and died by suicide in 2007. In 2014, the federal government designated the entire month of June as PTSD Awareness Month. Today, I have a new guest. His name is Wayne Brown. Thank you so much for coming on, sharing your insight. I think it's an important topic. Obviously, it's fairly new that we're really addressing this as Awareness Month, but thank you again for just coming on and sharing your insight with us.
I am happy to be here.
I just want to also share, I don't like reinventing the wheel, working in the mental health field, but if you are in crisis, I want to encourage those to seek out help. 988 is a Suicide Crisis Lifeline, but also I don't like reinventing wheels. So whether you're in the community of a church or a mosque or whatever it is, find someone that tell them I need help. As an adult, it's hard to say that, but I like to kind of encourage that. So with that being said, I want to start with a quote. It's like a Chinese proverb. I'd like to kind of go that way and then kind of see what your thoughts on that, and also let's just talk about it. Let's do
Sure.
that.
Happy to.
Chinese proverb says it's better to light a candle than curse the darkness. For me, it just reminds me of so much uncertainty when it comes to PTSD and how to support someone, and as family members, as friends, even those who are struggling with PTSD. It is rough. What comes to mind when you see this quote and when you think about PTSD and your experience with it?
Well, and one of the things that you need to remember about PTSD before you can actually have the post-traumatic stress diagnosis, that cannot come until a few months after the primary event. So if you experience a trauma, be it physical, mental, emotional, so severe that it is causing this long-term pain, your first diagnosis is going to be acute stress disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And acute stress disorder refers to the idea that one person just endured an overwhelming event of one form or another, and they are having a difficult time living without being in that event. That's the thing with post-traumatic stress, is what it puts the brain through is when you suffer a trigger of trauma, of remembering that trauma, your brain actually starts to replay the event in such a way that your brain goes into fight or flight mode, just as it did the first time of the event. As to what triggers a post-traumatic stress event is linked actually to the 5 senses: sight, smell, taste, touch, hearing. And it is however your brain has coupled the stimulus to that trauma event.
Yeah, and I do appreciate you mentioning that, because a lot of people get confused. Like, oh, I've been through trauma, and at the same time, it's the delayed response to it. It's like going to your niece's birthday and then being triggered, and then all of a sudden you have this fight or flight. That is nothing, and you feel the same way as that event when it first happened. So I do appreciate you clarifying that. It is also very difficult to kind of because a lot of people don't want to come up and say that they have something going on with them, and a lot of, especially those. I don't want to just point on the vets, but a lot of times, military communities. Me, I was in the Air Force, but also those who experience trauma in many different ways. Uh,
Well, and to that point, not to interrupt you, went for a not insignificant percentage of the population, their traumas start at earliest ages. So there is a baseline assessment that I do with all new clients, as I know a lot of other professional licensed therapists do with their new clients, and it's called the Adverse Childhood Experiences
mhm,
assessment. And what it's doing is measuring how many traumas an individual has suffered between the ages 0 and 18 years of age. And it is a rigorous, measured, and peer reviewed method of understanding how much trauma an individual has suffered in its youngest years. And what uh, we're looking at physical or emotional abuse. We're looking at physical or emotional neglect. Obviously, any sort of sexual trauma. You're
mhm,
also looking at primary family member incarcerated or separated for long periods of time. That could be incarceration in jail or prison. Uh, Substance use in the home. That could be alcohol, drugs, uh, any sort of mental illness, mental instability in the home. It can include any sort of uh, separation in the home where a parent divorces the other parent or breaks away from the home. And lastly, physical or emotional violence upon one of the primary parents. So, trauma, it's one of those things that everyone is dealing with in some way or another. Just so you know, of those 10 that we just went through,
mhm.
according to current medical information, approximately 12% of the population has 4 or more of those traumas, which is considered to be the threshold that you need for longer term, lifelong mental and or physical health damage.
And I just want to also when you mention neglect, 'cause a lot of times that gets overlooked. Like,
Mhm.
can you give examples? Because a lot of times we think of neglect as, what have you seen as when you go through the ACE study? Again, I don't remember
Mhm. Mhm.
what has been like a determining factor, or what do you look for when it comes to neglect? Because that gets kind of sometimes.
So, on physical neglect side, actually, as well as emotional neglect side, it's determined largely by the individual.
Okay.
So, very cooked into this whole uh, system. One of the other things that we're looking at in assessing someone's safety, someone's stability, is what is their attachment style? How do they attach not only to their family but also to their community? And
Hmm.
attachment style is usually determined within the first 2 years of life.
Hmm.
So, someone who has anxious attachment generally tends to fear or believe, for whatever reason, real or imagined, that their primary caretaker, be it parent, be it guardian, be it step parent, that they the connection is threatened. For
Hmm.
some people, that comes through as anxious of, I need to hold on to you dearly because if you leave, you might never come back.
I see.
Opposite side of the coin of that is someone who says, I'm going to reject you before you can reject me, and pushes support away so that way they can't feel that pain.
Yeah, I just want to also, you can kind of see that when at least when I'm trying to work with a client in the aspect when it comes to the forensic side, and you're trying to get them to how can I say it? You can see they test you. They test whether you know what I'm talking about. They
Mhm,
test
mhm.
you whether, and I would say the latter, what you're talking about, is kind of what kind of comes to mind when you say that. Will this person be here? Well, I'm going to test him.
Mhm.
Will he
Right,
show up? Um,
right.
I want to also segue to support. We're talking about different segue into support. It's difficult, and I want to ask from your perspective, what have you witnessed or what have you experienced? Helping others struggle in this. What has been effective when it comes to supporting? And I know it's going to be a loaded question because it's different for everyone, but what have you seen kind of help in regards to that?
Well, you're right. It is so individualized. It depends so much on where the patient is, where the individual who is suffering the trauma is. Are they effectively managing their trauma? Are they attempting to manage their trauma?
Mm,
Are they not acknowledging their trauma as well as their trauma response? So,
mm-hmm,
some people can experience lifetime trauma and become extremely withdrawn
mm,
and hole up so as to again protect themselves from the dangers of the slings and arrows of society,
mm-hmm,
whereas others can they can suppress their emotions and just keep going with the day, pretending everything's okay when it's not. And then on the far outside, the other way, you can get act out behaviors where it might be verbal, it might be physically violent. It and across that spectrum of behaviors, which I think you'd agree is a pretty wide spectrum,
mm-hmm,
is going to impact on who is supporting the individual,
mm-hmm,
how much are they supporting the individual, how old is the individual, and how dangerous does their support system feel that that person is to them. So, are we talking family? Are we talking significant other? Are we talking uh, married significant other or just dating? Um, there are
mm-hmm.
so many factors to consider.
Yeah. And I guess it's also culture.
Hmm.
I'm half Puerto Rican, half South Korean, so like, and that's confused. But in essence, I guess the best example is, let's say, someone who you know doesn't want to. It said, "I'll never harm anyone." They go to the military, they harm someone, and then they have a traumatic
Hmm.
experience through that. So there's also a degree of like moral injury in the idea that they now can't even see their self the same way, on top of the fact of the trauma that they're experienced, and that aspect. So and the lesser form is like, if I'm, what I find as a barrier is, and it sounds weird to say, but illiteracy, reading.
Hmm.
Like, literally, I could go with someone, and I find that they seem resistant, but it's because they can't read anything very well, and
Right.
that in itself, if there's not good historian or anything like that, you kind of, you're hitting walls. But the reality is, the person is trying to, even though they may have these, and they may share a little bit, and it's written down that there is, some trauma, they will not communicate, and they'll be like, oh, I'm fine, I'm doing fine, and that's all they want.
Well, it's also how real is the threat in being honest.
Yeah.
As a mandated reporter,
Hmm.
I know that if I'm doing an interview with an individual who is worried about, if I tell this person the whole truth, am I going to be hospitalized? Is Child Protective Services going to be knocking on my door tonight after dinner?
Hmm.
Do I have to worry about uh, being sent to the hospital or being sent to jail or some sort of other dangerous consequence? So, yeah, there is the factor of people don't speak out because they're afraid of being judged for their intellectual capacity. But there's also too many victims who have been told by the offender that they were actually the offender.
Mm-hmm.
and the victim doesn't know better, so they don't report because they're afraid of consequences.
Yeah. There's a quote I want to share. It's from Jake Wood. I don't know if you've seen this a while back. He says, "I feel no emotional connection to these outwardly human gestures. I'm not there because I've never left Afghanistan."
Mhm.
So, kind of like speaks on what we're talking about. But a lot of times with these when we think about this is where I feel like when I made the title the silent, the silent pain, it's appropriate. A lot of
Mhm.
times it is silent for whatever reason. We demonstrate some reasons that maybe to keep them silent. But what what I don't know. What are your thoughts on this quote or anything you want to share that I haven't been mentioned
Well,
yet?
I think when you I love the title "The Silent Pain," quite honestly,
Mm-hmm.
because mental health and mental health disorders are the silent pain because we live in a society that still doesn't accept mental health as a part of health.
Mm-hmm.
And the more we let our mental health deteriorate or judge someone else because they have mental health issues, the more severe our physical health gets. So if we're not treating our physical health, then yes, we are damaging, or if we're not treating our mental health, we are damaging our physical health. So if you do have family, if you do have friends, if you do have loved ones who are really struggling with their life history,
Mm-hmm.
then the number one best thing you can do is to be a supportive and loving friend,
Mm-hmm.
someone who is willing to be there and to be the receptacle. It does not mean that you need to necessarily accept trauma dumping,
Mm-hmm.
which that's what we call when an individual who has suffered a trauma inappropriately overshares with someone not qualified, not ready. That's where we, as the recipient, have the right to say, you know what, I don't know that I can help you, but I would love to help you find a professional who can help you process through this. As to this Jake Wood quote, that he feels no emotional connection with the outward human gestures, what he's talking about is disassociation.
Mm-hmm.
So when our midbrain goes into fight or flight mode, there's more than just fight or flight. There's also freezing and fawning.
Mm-hmm.
So someone who has this disassociation is likely freezing up. It's the brain saying, "This is too much. I'm taking a break."
Mm-hmm.
And you can be physically present and completely unaware as to what's going on.
Mm.
And it's not something exclusive to soldiers.
Yeah. And you mentioned, I just find communication is also a thing I want to also mention. Nowadays it's very hard to have any really effective communication. And well, I had a guest before. I thought it was an interesting thought. A lot of times we assume that people, even if they're good at piano or anything, that
Mm-hmm.
they just know it. But a lot of times people don't know it, and they don't feel appreciated. A lot of times, they don't feel heard. A lot of times, so
Correct.
I feel even it feels even more so today than it was before. They would say that, at least from my standpoint, um, the idea of just the person in the room that is always the life of the party. I think about Robert Williams and just how he kind of was just so giving, and he was so good to people around him, and
Mm-hmm.
no, sometimes people will not expect that he was really suffering underneath it all. So I would
You
that.
know what's funny is I remember being a kid and watching Mork and Mindy.
Mhm.
And then as he aged and did these other shows, even before he completed his suicide, which was
Mhm.
such a loss,
Mhm.
I always remember watching his shows, and one of my takeaways always was that he was funny and he was so lonely.
Mm.
Like it, Mrs. Doubtfire and Mork and uh, the the psychiatrist at Harvard. All
Mm.
these characters are extraordinarily isolated characters and
Mm.
manage their aloneness, manage their sadness by making jokes, by making other people laugh,
Mm.
keeping. While it seems like the spotlight is on them,
Mm.
really keeping the spotlight off of them, because if you're making jokes and someone else is laughing, the
Mm.
person who's laughing is noticing their laughter before your jokes.
Yeah. 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 I agree. I want to also, because I just want to. A lot of times I appreciate all the guests that come on, and I appreciate you coming on and sharing. But I also want to give you an opportunity, obviously, to share a little bit about yourself, if you whatever you feel comfortable with,
Mhm.
and what you do, and just it's just so those who are listening, watching, they can a little bit know about yourself before we continue on as we wrap up.
Yeah. So I am a licensed clinical social worker in private practice in Buffalo, New York. Uh, we have a small group practice, 5 of us in the practice right now.
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm not doing that, I teach at University of Buffalo, their University of Buffalo School of Social Work. And when I'm not doing that, I'm home with my family raising my 3 fantastic kids.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And a lot of times, it's one thing that I always find it interesting, the concept of time. We never have enough of it. Or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We always try to make time, but there's always never enough. And then there's too much time when there's certain things we don't want to do. So it's interesting. But I do appreciate you taking the time and just sharing your insight. I want to share a few quotes and then kind of get your final thoughts of this month and what you would like people to think about when it comes to PTSD. Michael Anthony says, Am I awake or dreaming? It doesn't matter anymore. When I close my eyes, I dream of death and war. When I open my eyes, I see death and war. It's tragic, but it's definitely. I feel when we think about awareness, not always just obviously we want to encourage those who are suffering to find help, but it's also recognize those who are suffering and also the families connected who are trying to support.
Mhm.
Um, Sunwa Raj says, it's not the person refusing to let go of the past, but the past refusing to let go of the person. Cheryl Richardson says, people start to heal the moment they feel heard. Unknown person says, you don't have to save me, you just have to hold my hand while I save myself. Self advocacy. Obviously, it's great. It seems like it sticks more when the person's involved in the treatment as opposed to just being supported. And yeah, so as we wrap up, this is post traumatic stress disorder month, this awareness month. It's only been what, maybe 10 years now, but a lot of other awareness months been a lot longer. What would you like to people to remember? What do you think is important for us to remember when we think about PTSD, mental health, or anything else that you want to share as we wrap up?
I would say that people who are struggling with trauma, regardless of what it says on your diagnostic sheet, if you're struggling with memories, with unprocessed memories that maybe you don't know what they are, but you're still feeling horrible. If you do know what your demons are and you're struggling to excise them, if you have a little bit of both where you don't know, but you feel like there's something going on as well as you do know and you're struggling with that, then the best thing that you can do is talk to a professional. Talk to someone who can help you sort it out. While I appreciate social media for its perceived connectedness,
Mm-hmm.
it is really merely perceived connectedness.
Mm-hmm.
And If you are isolated, then yes, social media has its benefits. 988 is a wonderful resource. There's also many free apps available for people who are looking for apps for managing their emotional dysregulation. I can email you a copy of those apps if you wish. Um, People need to believe themselves and then find someone who is willing to hear them and listen to them and help them process on these memories.
And those, those apps, I'll just put them in the notes. So those who are watching, those who are listening, you'll see the links. We'll put them in the notes if you want to check them out. I want to say thank you, Wayne. It was a pleasure having you and sharing your thoughts. And obviously this is an important month, but it's interesting with Awareness Month. It's like only June. No, I think every month we should really try to find the time to treat each other better,
Mhm.
ourselves better. This stuff will take time, but one person said to me, life is always unfinished. So that kind of gives you kind of relief that, it'll take the time it takes. We have this time
Yeah.
issue in our heads, this ticking urgency, but I would encourage those who are listening that your health, your value when it comes to your mental health does matter. And
Mhm.
take the time it takes. Get the professional help, just like Wayne Brown says. Get the professional help. Get the help you need. Don't worry about anyone else. Worry about taking care of you. Thank you so much, Wayne, for being on.
Thank you.
I'll say, remember to stay updated with Revive Ministry through the various platforms. ReviveMinistryFL.com is our website. We're going to end with this one quote from Deli Alanubi. She said, "Wounds won't heal the way you want them to. They will heal the way they need to."